I'm a researcher, so I'm an architect and a neuroscience researcher. So I'm sorry I'm the last one because it's going to be a bit of data, a bit of science. I know you guys don't have that much cognitive energy right now because you haven't eaten, so bear with me. We're almost going to get through this. So I work for Lombardini 22. Lombardini 22 is an architectural studio. We are #1 in the Italian scene. And I work for a specific department inside our studio called Neuroscience Lab. We are essentially an applied research laboratory inside. So we do studies that are long-term with PhDs, with neuroscientists, with psychologists, and social scientists. But also at the same time, we develop tools, technologies for, let's say, day-to-day practice, architectural practice, to help architects and urban designers as well. So it's sort of a mixed hybrid lab. And that's what I do. So today, I just want to take a little bit of time to explain one phenomenon that we've been researching for quite some time. It's kind of a global phenomenon, and just a couple of ideas on how we could sort of approach it. So we spoke about the smart city paradox. A couple of times I heard other people talk about it, but there's something even more important, that is the general urban paradox that we're going through right now across the world. This is an extremely interesting study that was done by Johan Pien from Scandinavia, where they studied data across multiple urban centers across the world. One of the major factors that they saw was that there was a 40% chance for you to develop problems of anxiety and depression if you were living in urban cities. Now, I'm not going to say that urban cities are the problem over here. There's a series of factors over here. It's not just the buildings, it's not just the design. You know, there's economic factors, there's the lack of connection between people. And this is something that is happening right now. This is not an issue of the past. At the same time, other researchers have found another interesting relationship. Now, what is this? I think you should focus yourself on the graph on the side. So this is research from 2020, World Happiness Report, where economists, social scientists, planners came together. What they see is, as cities develop in their economy, that it is subjective well-being keeps increasing linearly, but after a particular point where you see A and B, that the line that splits A and B, that after that threshold, it is no longer a linear relationship. Simply put, I'll explain what a linear relationship is. When something increases, when A increases, B increases. That is linear. Something is non-linear when A increases and B doesn't increase, B goes down, right? So this is important to understand. And for example, I can try to root it in Tirana. I'm not exactly sure where Tirana would fit inside this map, but I'm guessing that it is on the phase A, where we are still moving towards development. Even India, where I'm from, I would say that we are in phase A. But this study was done across the Western world, so North America, all OECD countries, so North America, Canada, Europe, Australia. And what they noticed was the largest cities, once they had crossed a level of economic development and density, it did not really help subjective well-being. It, in fact, was making it worse for people over there. So this is fundamentally important because this is serious data that even the World Health Organization has been relying on in the past years. So there is this tipping point, you know. It is not always linear growth to infinity. So coming back, in my speech, I will be kind of synthesizing amongst multiple points that I think a lot of people have raised. We have a lot in common over here, and this is good. I think we are onto something that's important. We have gotten really good across the past years in designing, let's say, physical infrastructure and digital infrastructure. We've gotten extremely good at it. I think congrats to all the people who presented over here, because it was beautiful, the kind of work that you guys are doing. But we still don't have a comprehensive methodology or a way to understand what we have been talking about, people-centered architecture or human-centered architecture. And this is the part that is completely something that we keep forgetting. And also, we don't keep developing, you know. This requires shared resources across departments. Now, this is one issue. At the same time, what we have is what I like to call the urban paywall. You create cities where to enter certain spaces, you need to have a certain kind of purchasing power. And without that purchasing power, what happens is you exclude groups. And I understand, I'm not anti-finance, I'm pro-longevity and pro-sustainability. So if you're looking for cities that need to be inclusive, it is important to understand where not to draw the boundaries. So since I'm talking about belonging, what exactly is belonging, right? Belonging is the sensation that I feel that this is my space, that I belong to this space, that I can do some action within this space, and I have some emotional connection with this as well. So there has to be some evidence that talks about this. So let's check that out. Now, there's no doubt humans are social creatures. It's evolutionary data. This is not my personal opinion. This particular study that was done by Julianne Holstad from Scandinavia, her research goes across 3.4 million people across the world to really identify that what is important is not what we like to think in architecture and design as socialization. It's a bit different because socialization implies that you can just talk to a random person and socialize over there. But what is very important is meaningful connection. Now, I'm kind of an introvert. I like my space. I know a lot of the times when people say socialization, they expect everybody to be an extreme extrovert. It doesn't have to be that way, Having one friend that is close to you is much better than having 100 friends who don't really know you, just to clear the room out there. At the same time, so we have this social connection with each other, and also we have an emotional connection with the places that we live inside. Now, this is an extremely interesting concept, and it's called place attachment, and it comes from the world of environmental psychology, but also neuroscience applied to architecture. What you see over here is that through understanding space, let's say visually, like you remember a place, it means something to you by looking at it, but also through repeated behavior, familiarity, that you keep using the same space. You have freedom to do the actions that you want to do. You develop what is called place attachment. And I heard yesterday, I was just talking with Jose yesterday, and he said, oh yeah, Albania, Tirana feels like home to me. I was like, yeah, why? Why does Tirana feel like home to you? And then he explained a couple of reasons. He's been coming here regularly, the people are friendly and they're open. So there's a series of factors that creates this sensation that this is my space, that I belong here, and that I have some agency over here. And this has been well studied, and it's extremely important, as we'll see later on. At the same time, I think a couple of others, even Ashik yesterday in his speech for Third Space, really spoke about this fact, that what we see as belonging, how people sort of appropriate, adapt, and use space, is something that in science is called emergent. Emergent meaning you cannot predict when it happens. It's just not predictable, right? This is a photo I took in 2017 in India. This was a government housing project in India that was designed with this street, was supposed to be a lane where people would throw their trash, and that's about it. Nothing else was supposed to happen. But what was extremely interesting while doing my thesis was that this had become their main area for socialization. It wasn't planned. It is what the people took into their own hands, and they transformed it into their own space. And a key over here is that I couldn't actually walk into the street because it was their space. It wasn't my space, right? This happens across the world. It's not just in India. It's a global phenomenon. People always use spaces more than what designers intended to be. And this across the globe, This happens even with small acts of rebellion, but also creative ways of using public parks. You find these desire paths where people find their own route inside. So we've spoken about a couple of different aspects. We spoke about the fact that there's a increasing mental health challenge with loneliness, with depression. We spoke about place attachment. We spoke about, at the same time, belonging, these ideas. Now, these are multiple different ideas that are there. Now, when approaching these kind of topics, especially social phenomenon with design, it is important to take what's called a systems perspective. And a system is essentially a series of parts that are interconnected but change across time. It is not static. And this is very important to understand, because I think a lot of us are very familiar with static maps of stakeholder maps, let's say, identifying actors in a place, but that's static. These are things that change across time, and they have ripple effects as well. One small change can have a drastic effect later on. So this is an outcome of some of the research that we have been doing inside at Lombardini, and what we have noticed is that what happens within space is not as simple as just saying, if you build it, they will come. It isn't that simple, Sometimes if you build it, they might not come, and this is very important to understand, because there's so much that people bring to space when they arrive there as well. So you might think that physical form itself could somehow create some kind of collective activity, but then that would be dependent upon the culture over there, what are the behavioral norms over there. Taking a public square from Europe and trying to make that work in India is a mess. We have tried that multiple times. It doesn't really work, because our culture is different. Some other research that really ties this together is what I'll show you right now. Now, this is research that was done in Switzerland at EPFL by Dr. Anna Pagani and her team, and they tried to map out urban health. How does urban health work? Now, I don't want you to get confused by the entire diagram, so I've just highlighted 3 parts over there, which could help you just orient yourself. What you can see is health in cities depends upon safety, sense of community, and let's say physical activity, which is kind of intuitively understandable. But fundamentally, that is also shaped by the quality of your neighborhood. So whether your neighborhood has the right amount of lighting, whether amenities work over there, whether you have access to nature, and a couple of other factors. But at the same time, you see that this is inside an entire network of other factors, from affordability of housing technology, from perceived noise disturbance, from what architects know about said spaces. And immediately starts realizing that it's not changing one thing at one time. It is understanding how these dynamics work and what pulls on each other, right? Like which part of the system pulls on the other part. Now, using this idea that there is a connection between how you feel safe and secure inside a neighborhood, if we move to the complexity of, let's say, place attachment, this bond that you create with your space, what determines that? What determines that you feel like you're part of the place, that, that this is your space? Now, one thing that this research that was conducted by Friesenberg was that they saw your quality of life in cities is strongly determined by whether you feel that this is your city or not. And this is very important because you find this a lot in urban cities, like where I live in Milan. We have a current crisis that is of social isolation and depression, and people don't really care for their cities. So if you do not care for your cities, automatically you're not going to take part in any of the activities, and automatically you're not going to have citizens. You're not going to have people who are going to actually use your city. I think the thing that is important to understand is the city without people is like a plastic tree. It looks good from far away, but like nothing grows on it. So it's important. So main predictors of place attachment, like what predicts this is actually social support. Like the fact that you have opportunities for social support. Like it can be of any type. This could be community gatherings, but it could also just be personal, interpersonal relationships between people. And this is fundamentally important over here. True other aspects also matter. Access to amenities, noise, which was another factor that Marvin was talking about this morning, that he heard a lot of noise in the neighborhood around him, and access to nature. And at the same time, loneliness has what you would call, I know you can see the plus and minus. Basically, it means is that more loneliness, less place attachment. This is all it is. It's just showing you the direction of these relationships. Now, I'm not here to nothing. Okay. I'm not here to provide any solutions because I'm still at let's say I'm a researcher. My way to tackle these problems is through the empirical method. So understand, observe, create a hypothesis, test, and then learn again. So this is what we do at Neuroscience Lab. So we're not going to give you one single solution. What I can do, especially when we're dealing with social phenomena, when we're trying to design, because we keep saying people-centered, human-centered, and all these other words that we've been using. But there needs to be a way to actually think about these problems. Because if you think of it as an engineering problem, as an optimization problem, we will run into trouble, because human behavior is complex, as we just saw over there. So dealing with complex system requires new mental models, new ways of thinking about it. So I'll just leave you with these 5 different ways of approaching problems. The first is what I'd like to call time blocks instead of timelines. Because a lot of the time we expect these linear timelines that sort of move towards infinity, that, okay, today we will do this, tomorrow we will do that, day after tomorrow we will do the other thing. But what COVID showed us all is uncertainty is something that we cannot predict. It is part of our lives. Social structures change, people change, AI comes into the picture, things change every week over here. So chunking your process, your design process into, let's say, specific phases of intervention, specific phases of observation is extremely important, because without that, you will not really update and sort of learn from the projects that you're designing. And this is very important, especially for social phenomenon. Now, this is not for, let's say, engineering problems, because there you have predictability. Second one is closing the loop. We keep hearing about feedback loops. We hear about public participation surveys. And I think when it comes to belonging, when it really feels like there is some relationship, it has to be reciprocal. It's not just extracting information from the citizens for the sake of data collection. I work as a data scientist as well, so I understand that we collect a lot of data, but there's always a question that comes from the other side. Okay, so what are you going to do with this data? What are you using it for, right? And if they are not involved in that secondary process of closing the loop that we reciprocate as well, then I'm not necessarily sure it is going to be a collaborative effort working into the future. The third one is non-linear interventions. This is what I explained before in terms of linear, non-linear, is that probably when you're looking at your city and trying to think of interventions, it is not necessary always to go for the largest intervention. It is probable that you could find the most strategic intervention, which is scales of project and the financial budgets. So not always can you solve all issues with in one shot. So maybe try with smaller interventions that could ripple across time. The fourth one is recognizing the invisible. This is, simply put, we map a lot of data in our cities. I work with let's say occupancy sensor data, how people move within space, flow data. This is all pretty interesting data, but what we lack sometimes is the meaning underneath this data. Now, if I take all 100 of us over here, and we check this data, there is something between the people. There is a social relationship. There are networks of people who know each other over here. But if I were to take 100 of us and put us in a warehouse in the middle of a desert, there isn't really any meaning over there, because these are just random people over there who are just congregating. So when we map out cities, there's a way to map out in terms of, let's say, stakeholders, but then there's also a way of mapping out social networks. Who are the people related to in this neighborhood? And this requires, this is not just a designer challenge, but this is also a community challenge over here. So we need to be able to map out these other aspects. How much time do people dwell in certain places? Why do people move towards other spaces instead of the spaces that we have designed? And this is data, because you might think that this is qualitative, but it isn't. It is quantitative data that you can actually inform projects. And the last one is a personal one, is immersive practice. We are Lombardini, we are located only in Milan. We're not anywhere else. For a particular reason, we are off the street that we are in. It's called Via Lombardini 22, so the name comes from there. And this is very important, because even personally for myself, one of the ways to actually get in and understand the dynamics of a city, you need to be part of it. There is no detached observation. There is no detached way of trying to understand a city, because without immersion, you kind of lose the touch, It's the same thing as trying to look at that plastic tree, It's far away, doesn't have the life that it needs. So what I'd like to leave you all with is just this idea, like we've spoken about people, we've spoken about cities, and if you consider them as living systems, things that grow across time, this belonging, this sense of it being your own, is the metabolism that keeps the city alive. Without it, without these people, you don't have any cities, You have these empty boxes that don't really do anything. Thank you.